What happens to your brain when you read the Bible every day? Reading the Bible every day does something stranger than most people realize. It does not simply fill your mind with religious ideas. It slowly changes the landscape where your thoughts are born. Long before your beliefs become visible in your actions, your attention begins to drift toward different things. The same world remains outside you, yet your brain starts assigning different meaning to what it sees. Small frustrations lose some of their urgency. Quiet moments feel less empty. Even suffering can begin to carry a different emotional texture. This is not only about faith. It is also about the remarkable ability of your brain to reshape itself through repeated mental experience, a process psychologists call neuroplasticity. Understanding that process may explain why the person you become tomorrow is quietly being shaped by what you choose to read today. Here's the mechanism. Every time you read the same text, your brain activates the same neural pathway, and every activation strengthens that pathway through long-term potentiation, the biological basis of habit and memory. Over months, this repetition recruits the prefrontal cortex, the seat of moral reasoning and self-control, while simultaneously calming the amygdala, your threat detection center. The result is a nervous system that associates the text with safety itself, not just meaning. Psychologists call this a self-schema, a mental framework that filters how you interpret everything else. You stop reading the Bible for information. You start reading it to regulate. This produces a mind that feels calm, structured, and certain, and increasingly dependent on that structure to feel safe at all. The first thing that changes is time itself. You wake, and before anything else touches your mind, before the phone, before the day's noise, you reach for the same book, in the same chair, in the same light. It feels less like a choice now, and more like gravity. Skip it, and something in your chest tightens, subtle but unmistakable, like leaving the house without checking the stove. This is what behavioral psychologists call cue-based automaticity, when an action becomes so tightly bound to a specific time and place that the brain executes it before conscious thought intervenes. The ritual isn't really about the words anymore. It's about the architecture the words built. You've noticed this yourself, probably. The mild unease on the one morning you couldn't get to it. That unease isn't weakness. It's your nervous system asking where the floor went. The second shift is quieter, and it happens in your vocabulary before you ever notice it in your thinking. Certain words start arriving in your head unbidden. Mercy, burden, surrender, season, borrowed directly from the text, now surfacing in ordinary moments that have nothing to do with religion. You describe a hard week at work as a trial. You call a friend's betrayal a testing. This is linguistic relativity in action, the well-documented principle that the language available to you shapes the thoughts you're capable of having. When a text supplies your emotional vocabulary every single day, it doesn't just describe your inner world anymore. It starts drawing its borders. You reach for its metaphors the way another person reaches for therapy language, or startup jargon, or the private slang of a marriage. The words feel like insight. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're simply the only shape your mind has been given to pour a feeling into. The third change happens in the space right before you fall asleep, when your mind reviews the day the way it always has. Except now, it's using a different measuring stick. You don't just ask whether you were productive or kind. You ask whether you were faithful, whether you were patient, whether you failed some standard the book laid out that morning. This is the internalization of an external moral schema. Psychologically, it means an outside code has migrated inward and now runs quietly in the background as your default self-evaluation system. It's efficient. It's also relentless. Because unlike a boss or a parent, this voice never clocks out. It reviews your thoughts, not just your actions, and thoughts are much harder to control than behavior. You lie there some nights running an audit no one asked you to run, against a bar that was never meant to be cleared daily. That exhaustion isn't a sign you're failing the practice. It's a sign the practice has fully moved in. The fourth change is harder to spot because it disguises itself as clarity. Ambiguous situations that once left you uneasy, a friend's mixed motives, an uncertain diagnosis, a decision with no clean answer, start feeling almost unbearable now, and you notice yourself reaching for the text to resolve them before you've even fully sat with the discomfort. This is intolerance of uncertainty, a well-studied psychological trait linked to anxiety, where the brain treats not knowing as a threat rather than a neutral state. Daily reading trains a very specific skill, converting confusion into resolution on command. That's a real cognitive advantage in some settings. It also means uncertainty itself starts to feel like danger, rather than simply information you don't have yet. You may notice you've become less patient with people who sit comfortably in doubt, not because you disagree with them, but because their doubt echoes a discomfort you've trained yourself out of tolerating. Here's where it's worth pausing, because everything described so far could sound like a diagnosis. It isn't. Needing structure isn't a character flaw. It's a design feature of every human brain that has ever tried to function inside chaos. The same mechanism that makes daily reading feel necessary is the mechanism that lets athletes train, that lets musicians practice scales until they disappear into the music, that lets anyone build a self capable of showing up consistently when motivation fails. Psychologists call this trait conscientiousness, and it is one of the most reliable predictors of a stable, capable life. What you're building through repetition isn't weakness dressed up as devotion. It's a nervous system that has learned how to hold a shape under pressure. The discomfort you feel reading these signs isn't proof something is wrong with you. It's proof you're the kind of person who examines your own architecture instead of assuming it's invisible. That instinct is rarer and more valuable than it feels right now. The sixth change shows up somewhere you didn't expect it to, in how you listen to the people closest to you. You find yourself quietly measuring your husband's patience, your child's honesty, a friend's choices, against a framework they never agreed to be measured by. You don't say it out loud, you don't even fully admit it to yourself. But there's a version of every conversation now that runs in the background, checking it against a standard shaped by whatever you read that morning. This is schema-driven perception, the tendency for an internalized framework to color not just self-judgment, but the judgment of everyone around you, often without conscious awareness. It can make you a more attentive partner, a more reflective parent, noticing things others miss. It can also make you quietly lonely, because the people you love aren't reading the same text, at the same hour, building the same internal courtroom. You may find yourself forgiving them for falling short of a bar they never knew existed, and that forgiveness, however loving, still carries the weight of a verdict. The seventh change is the one people almost never say out loud, even to themselves. Somewhere beneath the routine, a quiet question has been waiting. Who am I on the days I don't do this? Not what do I believe, who am I? That distinction matters more than it seems. When a daily practice becomes load-bearing for your identity, psychologists describe this as identity fusion, the point where a behavior and a sense of self become so entangled that losing one feels like losing the other. It's why missing even a single morning can produce a disproportionate wave of guilt, or dread, or something close to grief. Not because you failed a task, but because for a moment, you couldn't locate yourself without it. This isn't unique to Scripture. It's what happens to anyone whose stability was built on a single unshakable pillar, run every day without exception. The tenderness here isn't in the practice itself. It's in what the practice was quietly protecting you from having to face alone. Your brain is always becoming the place where you spend the rest of your life. Every repeated thought leaves a trace. Every habit quietly casts a vote for the person you are slowly becoming. Reading the Bible every day may not change everything you face, but it can change the mind that faces it. Perhaps the most profound transformation is not found in dramatic moments at all. It is found in the ordinary pages you return to, day after day, until one morning you realize that the world is the same, yet the person looking at it is no longer the one who began reading. If you want to understand not just what you believe, but how believing shapes your brain, this channel is for you. @RewiredC breaks down the quiet mechanics of the mind, so you can see yourself more clearly. Comment, share, and subscribe to @RewiredC and keep rewiring how you think. Thanks for staying up to this moment. Let's keep going deeper, one video at a time.